Marcus thought he was toasting the man of the hour. He was standing at the head of that table in the private dining room at Arden's, wine glass raised, grinning like he'd already won everything worth winning. His wife was sitting right beside him, quiet, smiling, holding her clutch in her lap like it was nothing special inside. What nobody at that table knew, what Marcus had never once thought to ask in 3 years of marriage, was that she owned the company he worked for, had owned it for almost 2 years.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I want you to picture the private dining room at Arden's. If you're from this city and you know anything about where people go when they want to be seen, you know Arden's. Black-owned, been there 30 years, leather booths, low lighting, the kind of place where the bread comes out warm and the check comes out painful. Gerald Caldwell, my father-in-law, had reserved the back room for 12 people, white tablecloths, a bottle of Whispering Angel already open when we arrived, a framed photo of Marcus on the credenza by the door, like this was a retirement party or a funeral. It was neither. It was a promotion dinner. Marcus had just been named top regional director at Harwell Group, his father's commercial real estate firm. First person to hold that title at his age in the company's history, according to Gerald, who said that particular fact 3 times before the appetizers arrived. I sat beside my husband. I wore the burgundy dress he'd approved earlier that week. I smiled at the right moments. I asked Cheryl about her daughter's soccer tournament, just like I'd been doing at these dinners for 3 years. I ordered the salmon. Marcus stood up somewhere between the entrees and the dessert menu. He raised his glass. He thanked his father for the foundation, thanked his colleague Brent for being a real one, thanked the team for making him look good. Then he turned to me. And I want to tell you what he said, but first I need you to understand something. This was not the first time. It was just the first time he did it in front of Gerald's church friends, his operations director, and a man named Brent, who laughed at everything louder than necessary. And of course, Marcus said, smile wide, I gotta thank my wife. Dani has been incredibly supportive. He paused. Let the table settle in her own way. Somebody chuckled. She keeps the household running, calendars always managed. My shirts come back from the cleaners on time, which, honestly, if you knew how many shirts I have... More laughter. Gerald shaking his head like Marcus was just too charming for his own good. But for real, she knows her lane. That's all a man can ask for. She married well, and I married organized. He winked at me. Bless her heart. The table laughed. Gerald laughed the loudest. I smiled. I picked up my water glass. I took a sip. And then I reached into my clutch. Let me back up because none of what happened that night makes sense without this part. Before I was Marcus Caldwell's wife, I was Danielle Marie Foster. I go by Dani. Always have. I grew up in this city, middle-class family, parents who worked hard and expected the same from me. My mother was a loan officer for 22 years. My father ran a small accounting practice out of a strip mall on the east side for most of my childhood. I watched both of them spend their careers helping people who were usually one bad quarter away from losing something they'd spent decades building. That shaped me. I got a finance degree, then a master's in community development. I spent 3 years at a CDFI, a community development financial institution, learning how minority-owned businesses actually access capital, which is complicated and slow and full of paperwork that most people don't have the patience for. Then at 29, I co-founded my own consultancy with a woman named Priya, who understood underwriting the way most people understand breathing. We helped small Black-owned and Brown-owned businesses navigate SBA loans, CDFI funding, and private lending structures. We were not flashy. We did not have a publicist. We had clients who called us crying because we'd just gotten them approved for something 3 banks had already denied. 7 years in, a regional financial services company approached us about acquiring the majority stake in our firm. Priya and I negotiated for 4 months. We walked away with enough money that I could have stopped working entirely if I wanted to. I did not want to, but I did take a year off. And somewhere in that year, I met Marcus Caldwell at a fundraiser for a community land trust. He was charming. He was fine. He talked about his father's firm like it was a legacy he was proud to carry forward. He asked me questions about my work and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. Later, I would understand that he was performing interest, not feeling it. But I didn't know that yet. We dated for 14 months. We got married at a venue his father selected, in front of 300 people I mostly didn't know. The wedding was beautiful in that way. That means money was spent and someone else made all the decisions. On our honeymoon, I told Marcus the sale had netted me just over $2 million. He said, "Oh, that's great, babe. Your little non-profit thing actually paid off." Then he put his headphones in and watched a movie for the rest of the flight. That was the first sign. I told myself it wasn't. Here's the thing about erasure. It doesn't happen all at once. If it happened all at once, you'd recognize it and leave. It happens in small enough pieces that you keep thinking you're misreading the situation. You keep giving the benefit of the doubt until the doubt is the only thing left with any benefit. At Harwell Group events, Marcus introduced me as my wife, Dani. Full stop. No last name. No context. On 2 separate occasions, people asked me if I worked in hospitality because I was so good at making people feel comfortable at parties. I said no. They moved on. Marcus never corrected the impression. Gerald's wife, Miss Lorraine, was a sweet woman who'd been performing the role of supportive corporate wife for so long she'd forgotten there was another option. She took me under her wing in a way that felt warm until I realized what she was actually teaching me. How to ask questions that made men feel smart. How to redirect conversations away from anything that might make the women in the room seem like competition. How to be present without being substantial. At church, and church mattered in this family, Gerald was a deacon. Marcus had grown up there. Half the congregation had known him since he was in the children's choir. I was Marcus's wife, isn't she lovely? The women were kind to me. The men were polite and then immediately turned back to Gerald. I started taking up less room, not because I was collapsing, because I was watching. I want to be clear about that distinction. There's a version of this story where I was broken down slowly and rebuilt myself. That is not this story. I knew who I was the entire time. What I was doing was learning the terrain, learning who actually made decisions versus who just held titles, learning which of Gerald's board members were loyal to him personally and which ones were loyal to their own financial interests, learning how the firm's revenue was structured and where it was fragile. I was not performing helplessness. I was conducting an audit. The call came on a Wednesday evening in October, about 18 months before the dinner at Arden's. Marcus was at a client event. I was at home going through some continuing education materials for a financial advisory certification I'd been quietly working on. My phone rang, and it was Gerald's cell number, which was unusual. He almost always called Marcus directly and let Marcus relay anything family-related to me. I answered. He asked if Marcus was home. I said no. There was a pause, and then he said he actually needed to speak with me. His voice had a quality I'd never heard from him before. Gerald Caldwell was a man who had spent 40 years projecting confidence so consistently that it had probably become involuntary. This was not that voice. This was a man holding something heavy. He asked if we could meet in person. We met the next morning at a coffee shop near his office. He arrived before me, which told me something. Gerald was the kind of man who made people wait. He was already on his second cup when I sat down. His hands were wrapped around it like he needed the warmth. He told me the firm was in trouble. Harwell Group had expanded aggressively over the previous 2 years, acquiring 3 commercial properties in markets that then softened faster than anyone projected. Interest rates had climbed. 2 of the properties were facing foreclosure proceedings. The third had a balloon payment coming due in 60 days that the firm's liquidity could not cover. The gap was $800,000, minimum. Gerald had not told Marcus. He had not told the board. He had gone to 2 private lenders who had both declined after reviewing the firm's current debt structure. He had considered a second mortgage on the family home, which Miss Lorraine did not know about. And then he'd thought of me. Not because he respected my professional background. I want to be precise about that. He thought of me because he believed I had nonprofit connections. His words. That might point him towards some emergency community lending program or government relief fund. He thought I was a woman who knew people who gave money away. He was asking the wrong question in the right direction. I listened to everything. I asked 3 clarifying questions about the debt structure. He answered them. Surprised, I knew what to ask. Then I told him I would look into some options and get back to him within a week. I did not tell him what kind of options I was actually considering. I drove home and called Renata Cross before I even got out of the car. Renata Cross has been my attorney since the acquisition of my firm. She is not warm. She is precise. She is fast, and she does not let sentiment anywhere near a contract negotiation. She's the kind of woman who orders the same thing at every restaurant because she decided years ago that decision fatigue is a tax she refuses to pay. I trust her completely. I laid out Gerald's situation in full. The properties, the debt, the balloon payment, the timeline. Renata listened without interrupting, which meant she was already thinking. When I finished, she asked her question. Are you trying to save his daddy's company, or are you trying to own it? I had gone into that call thinking about options, bridge loans, emergency CDFI programs, maybe a private investor introduction. I was still, at that point, thinking like a consultant trying to solve a client's problem. That question reframed everything. I sat with it for about 10 seconds. Then I said, what would it take to own it? Renata spent the rest of that call and the next 3 days doing what she does, which is reading every available document about Harwell Group's corporate structure, outstanding debt, ownership percentages, and board composition. She pulled Gerald's business filings, the firm's most recent audit, and the terms of the 2 loans already in default. Here is what I had available. Just over $1.4 million in liquid assets from the firm's sale, plus access to a private CDFI investment structure I'd helped build during my consultancy years that could hold equity on behalf of individual investors without making the individual's name publicly visible on the ownership record. I also had a relationship with a private lender who could cover the remaining gap at favorable terms if the collateral structure was right. Renata said we could build a holding entity through the CDFI structure, capitalize it with my funds plus the private loan, inject the capital into Harwell Group as a rescue investment, and negotiate 54% controlling interest in exchange. Gerald would keep his title. His name would stay on the building. The board would remain intact. From the outside, Harwell Group would look exactly the same. The only thing that would actually change was who owned it. He'll sign, Renata said. He's desperate enough and proud enough that he won't read carefully, but we're going to give him the opportunity to have his own counsel review it. If he declines that, that's on him. Gerald declined. I want to give Renata her full credit here, because what she built over the following 2 weeks was not simple. The holding structure ran through a CDFI-linked investment entity called Meridian Community Capital Partners, a real organization, properly registered, with a legitimate history of minority business investment. My funds flowed in as a private limited partner contribution. The controlling interest agreement was buried inside a 40-page restructuring document that was dense even by the standards of people who read dense documents professionally. Renata also built in a clause that gave me approval authority over any executive-level personnel changes, any new equity offerings, and any debt exceeding $100,000. Gerald read the first 3 pages, asked if his name was staying on the building, and signed where the tabs indicated. His signature was witnessed, notarized, filed. The morning after he signed, Gerald called me. He sounded lighter than he had in weeks. He said, "Dani, I want you to know I'm grateful. You really came through for this family." He said it like I'd brought a casserole to a sick relative. I told him I was glad the firm was going to be okay. He said to give his love to Marcus. That evening, Marcus came home and told me his father had sorted out a cash flow situation at the firm. He was relieved, not curious. He did not ask how it had been sorted. He moved on to telling me about a deal he was close to closing and what it would mean for his year-end numbers. I made dinner. I listened to him talk. I thought about the 40-page document sitting in Renata's files with my signature controlling 54% of everything Marcus was describing as his future. I should tell you what those 18 months looked like from the outside, because from the outside, they looked completely unremarkable. Dani Caldwell went to church on Sundays with her husband. She attended Harwell Group quarterly dinners and company anniversary events and the annual golf fundraiser she had never once played golf at. She smiled. She asked about people's children. She complimented Miss Lorraine's cooking at family dinners. And every month, Gerald called her on her personal cell to check in, which meant he had a question about something operational at the firm and needed quiet sign-off from the person who actually held controlling interest without being able to say that's what he was doing. He would frame it as family conversation. He would say something like, "I wanted to get your read on something," and I would give my read, and the decision would be made. Marcus never knew his father was calling me. He never knew I was reviewing quarterly financials on my laptop in the second bedroom I'd converted into a home office, a room Marcus assumed I used for personal projects. He never asked what the personal projects were. He was too busy building a career on a foundation he didn't know I'd poured. There were moments that cost me more than I expected. A dinner where Gerald made a toast about how Marcus had grown into his father's son, and everyone raised a glass, and I raised mine too, knowing that the son's entire upward trajectory existed because I'd kept the firm from collapsing. A Sunday service where the pastor asked couples to stand and thank God for their partners, and Marcus stood and nodded and squeezed my hand and said afterward that he was lucky to have such a supportive wife, and meant it as a compliment. The patience required for those moments was not nothing. I want to be honest about that. But I had made a decision about timing, and I held to it. About 3 months before the dinner at Arden's, Marcus came home with news. He was excited. He does this thing when he's excited where he comes through the door already talking before he's even taken his jacket off. He told me the firm was in late-stage conversations with an Atlanta-based real estate group, a well-capitalized outfit that wanted to acquire a minority stake in Harwell Group as part of a regional portfolio expansion. I set down what I was cooking. He kept talking. The deal would bring in new capital, new market relationships. It was the kind of partnership that signaled Harwell Group was playing at a higher level. His father was thrilled. The board was aligned. I said that sounded significant. Then I went to the bathroom, closed the door, and texted Renata 4 words. "Call me tonight. Urgent." Here's what scared me. I did not know off the top of my head whether an incoming minority equity partner could, under the existing shareholder agreement, create complications for my controlling position. The agreement Renata had structured was thorough, but real estate deals have a way of introducing terms that interact with existing documents in ways that take a week to fully trace. Renata called at 9:30 that evening after Marcus was asleep. I sat in my car in the garage with the engine off and the phone to my ear. She spent 4 days reviewing the proposed term sheet against our existing structure. 4 days during which I went to a birthday dinner for Gerald, attended a Sunday service, and helped Marcus pick out a new watch for himself as a pre-promotion gift, as he called it. On the 4th day, Renata called and told me we were fine. The Atlanta Group's stake would be subordinate to my holding entity's position. My controlling interest was protected. The deal could close without affecting anything I'd built. I slept that night, but that week reminded me that I was not untouchable. I was just prepared. I did not forget that feeling. 6 weeks before the dinner, Marcus got the call. Top regional director. He was in the kitchen when it came through, and I watched his face do something I hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine surprise, then pleasure, then the immediate project of performing the right amount of modesty while actually feeling none. He hugged me. He said, "We did it, babe," which was interesting phrasing. That same night, he texted the private room reservation at Arden's, told 12 people the date and time, and included a list of what the evening's agenda would look like. Not an invitation, an agenda. I saw the text over his shoulder. I did not say anything. 4 days before the dinner, he sat me down at the kitchen table and slid a piece of paper across to me. Handwritten, a short list. He said he just wanted to make sure the evening went smoothly, that these were good conversation topics for me to stick to. He'd included, ask about people's kids, compliment Cheryl's hair if she'd done something new with it, keep things light, steer away from business topics because it gets complicated and I don't want you to feel out of your depth in front of these people. He said it like he was doing me a favor. I took the list. I said, "Thank you, Marcus, this is helpful." He smiled. He patted my hand. He went back to whatever he was watching. I went to the kitchen, refilled my water, and sent Renata a text that said, "Friday delivery. Everything ready." She responded in under a minute. Already done. Friday afternoon, a woman I didn't know rang my doorbell. She was carrying a sealed envelope with Renata's firm name in the upper left corner, and she needed my signature to release it. I signed. I took the envelope to the kitchen table and opened it carefully. Inside, the complete ownership documentation for Meridian Community Capital Partners' controlling interest in Harwell Group, Renata's cover letter summarizing the key terms, a formal notice of my status as majority shareholder, and a termination letter for Marcus Caldwell, Regional Director, effective upon delivery, signed and dated and prepared on official letterhead. Renata had also included a short handwritten note on her personal stationery that said, "Process server will be at Arden's by 7, table 6. He knows what to do. Call me if anything changes." I put everything back in the envelope. I put the envelope in my clutch. Then I called my friend Kezia, who does hair out of her home studio 2 neighborhoods over, and asked if she had any availability that afternoon. She said, "Come at 3. I was there by 3:15. I got a fresh blowout and we talked about her new apartment for 90 minutes. I want you to understand something about that afternoon. I was not shaking. I was not second-guessing. I had spent 18 months making sure this moment would be clean and legal and irrefutable. All that was left was showing up. I showed up. We arrived at Arden's at 7:15. Gerald was already there, of course, holding a glass of bourbon and telling a story to Brent and one of the church deacons, Deacon Horace, who had no particular business reason to be at a corporate promotion dinner, but whom Gerald liked to have around because Horace made him feel important. Cheryl from operations was there. She'd done something new with her locks, had them pinned up with gold thread woven through. I told her they looked beautiful. She thanked me and seemed mildly surprised that I'd noticed. There were 12 of us in the room. I knew almost all of them. Most of them knew me as Marcus's wife, Dani. Organized, quiet, supportive, knew her lane. The evening moved the way those evenings always move. Warm bread, oversized appetizers. Everyone performing a slightly elevated version of themselves because the room and the occasion required it. Marcus was in his element, relaxed, funny, self-deprecating in the specific way that actually draws attention to the accomplishment you're pretending to downplay. Gerald ordered a second bottle of wine without asking anyone else at the table. I checked the room quietly. Table 6, near the window, a man in a dark blazer eating alone, working through a glass of water at a pace that suggested he was not actually there for the food. He didn't look at our table. He didn't need to. I had the envelope in my clutch. My hand was resting on it. Then Gerald stood up. Gerald's toast was everything you'd expect from a man who has been the most important person in every room he's entered for 40 years. He spoke about legacy. He spoke about the Caldwell name. He talked about what it meant to watch his son grow into the man he'd always hoped he'd become. He got a little emotional at the end, or performed getting a little emotional, I was never sure with Gerald, and the table responded with the warmth he was looking for. Marcus stood up. He thanked his father, thanked Brent, thanked Cheryl for keeping the operations side honest. He was smooth. He was likable. He had practiced this, I knew. I'd heard him in the bathroom mirror twice that week, but he delivered it in a way that sounded spontaneous. And then he turned to me. "And my wife," he said, and his voice shifted into that affectionate register that preceded the jokes, the one I'd learned to recognize the way you learn to recognize a change in weather. Dani has been my rock. She really has. He smiled at me. The table smiled at me. She keeps everything running at home. Calendars always handled. My shirts come back from the cleaners on time, which, trust me, is more of an achievement than it sounds. Light laughter. He was warming up. I could feel it. Honestly, he tilted his head, her biggest professional achievement might be that she hasn't lost a dry cleaning ticket in 3 years. More laughter. Gerald chuckling. Brent doing his loud thing. I'm just saying, she knows her lane. That's a skill. Bless her heart. He winked at me. She married well, and I'm a lucky man. He raised his glass. Deacon Horace raised his. Gerald was laughing so hard there were actual tears. I looked at my husband. I smiled. I said, "Marcus, that is so sweet." Then I opened my clutch. I placed the envelope on the table in front of Marcus. He looked at it, looked at me, still half smiling, still riding the wave of the room's approval. "What's this?" He picked it up like it might be a card, an anniversary thing, a joke of some kind. "Open it," I said. Something in my voice, not loud, not sharp, just flat in a specific way, made the table notice. The laughter hadn't fully died yet, but it was fading, the way a song fades when someone turns down the volume without stopping it completely. Marcus opened the envelope. At the same moment, the man from table 6 stood up, crossed the room, and placed a second sealed envelope in front of Gerald. Gerald looked up. "Excuse me, who are—" "Gerald Caldwell?" the man said, quiet and professional. "You've been served." Gerald's hand froze on the envelope. Marcus was still reading. His face had changed completely. The smile was gone. The color was going with it, draining out in real time like someone had opened a drain somewhere. His eyes moved across the page, and I watched them stop, go back, move forward again. His hands, and I noticed this specifically, began to tremble slightly, just enough to make the papers shift. The table had gone completely still. I let him finish reading. I gave him that. Then I spoke clearly, at a volume that reached every person in that room. "I own 54% of Harwell Group. That makes me the majority shareholder. I have been the majority shareholder for 22 months. I looked at Marcus. Effective tonight, your position as regional director is terminated. Your office access will be revoked Monday morning. Someone from operations will contact you next week regarding the formal transition." I looked at Gerald. "You signed the shareholder agreement in this room's name, Gerald. Renata gave you 21 days to have your own attorney review it. You chose not to." Silence. Not the comfortable kind. Gerald recovered first, which made sense. He'd been navigating crises for 40 years. He pushed his chair back and stood up with the energy of a man who believed volume and authority were interchangeable. This is a misunderstanding." He was looking around the table, recruiting the room. "Dani, whatever you think those documents say, we need to have a conversation with our attorneys present before anything." Gerald. It was Cheryl. She hadn't moved. She was still in her seat, both hands flat on the table, looking at Gerald with an expression I can only describe as finished. 11 years at that firm. She had watched Gerald promote Marcus over 2 colleagues who had been there longer and performed better. She had sat through quarterly meetings where Gerald talked about the company's turnaround without mentioning where the rescue capital had come from. She had never said anything because that was not how things worked at Harwell Group. She said it now. "Gerald, stop." 2 words. But the way she said them, not angry, not dramatic, just done, took the air out of Gerald's performance faster than anything I could have said. He looked at her. He looked at the table. For the first time that evening, Gerald Caldwell was not sure who was on his side. Deacon Horace was staring at the tablecloth. Brent had put his fork down. Marcus had not looked up from the documents. I picked up my clutch. I smoothed my dress. I looked at the table one more time. "Thank you all for coming," I said. "The salmon was excellent. I'd recommend it." I walked out. The Ardens parking lot in October is cold in a way that hits different after a warm room. I stood beside my car for a moment and let it. Through the window of the private dining room, I could see the table. Everyone standing now, Gerald gesturing, Marcus still holding the papers, unmoving, like he'd been paused. Cheryl was the only person still seated, and she was looking at her phone. My own phone started going before I reached the highway. Marcus first. I declined. Then Gerald. Declined. Then a number I didn't recognize. Probably Brent, who collected information at events the way other people collected business cards. I drove home. The house was quiet in a way that felt different from usual. Usually the quiet of that house was the absence of Marcus. Temporary, pending his return. This quiet was something else. It felt like mine. I put my clutch on the counter. I put the kettle on. I stood in the kitchen in my burgundy dress and waited for the water to boil and thought about exactly nothing for about 3 minutes, which was the first time I'd been able to do that in a very long time. My phone buzzed on the counter. I looked at it. Renata had texted. "Process server confirmed delivery. Board notification goes out Monday at 9. Get some sleep." I made my tea. I drank it standing up. I went to bed. I slept 8 hours straight, which I had not done since before the Atlanta investor scare. Monday morning, Renata attended the board meeting without me. I had been deliberate about that. I did not want the board's first experience of this new reality to be me in the room performing authority. I wanted them to experience the paperwork, the legal structure, the clear and unambiguous fact of the ownership percentage, and then make their decision based on that. Whatever they decided, I wanted it to be their decision, not a response to my presence. Renata texted me at 10:47, 6-1. Gerald was the one. Claudette's appointment ratified, effective 1st of next month. I was at my kitchen table with a second cup of coffee and a notepad where I'd been sketching out what a relaunched consulting practice might look like. I read the text. I set the phone down. I wrote 2 more lines on the notepad. Claudette Osei had spent 20 years in commercial real estate leadership. She had run operations for a regional firm in Charlotte before moving here 4 years ago. I'd met her through a professional network 18 months earlier, had lunch with her twice, and had been quietly honest with her about the situation at Harwell Group and what I was considering doing about it. She had asked hard questions. She had done her own due diligence on the firm. She had said she was interested, contingent on full operational authority. I had told her I wouldn't have it any other way. The board had voted for her, 6-1. Gerald's one dissenting vote was technically valid and entirely meaningless. Gerald made his play the following week. I heard about it first from Renata, who had a contact on the firm's administrative staff. Gerald was calling people, not board members. He'd already lost that vote. He was calling church people, Deacon Horace, a woman named Beverly who ran the hospitality committee and knew everyone's business by vocation. 2 elders who had known Gerald since the early days of the firm and thought of him as a pillar of the community. His message, as it reached me through 3 different sources, was consistent. Dani had taken advantage of him during a vulnerable moment. She had used her nonprofit connections to trick him into signing documents he didn't understand. She was motivated by spite, by her issues with Marcus, by a personal vendetta that had nothing to do with the business. She had betrayed the family. He did not mention the $800,000. He did not mention the foreclosure proceedings. He did not mention the balloon payment. He did not mention that he had called me specifically because he thought I was the easiest person in his family to manipulate. He mentioned none of that. Deacon Horace called me on a Thursday afternoon. He was kind about it. Horace is genuinely a kind man, even when he's being used. He said he'd been hearing some things and wondered if I'd be open to sitting down with Gerald and finding a path forward. A Christian resolution, he called it. I told him I respected that and I was happy to meet with Gerald through our attorneys any time he wanted to arrange it. Horace called me back the next day. Gerald had declined the attorney option. Horace said he understood and he'd be praying for all of us. He didn't call again after that. And from what I could tell, the church campaign ended more or less where it started, with people having opinions about a situation they only had one side of, which is not the same as having a problem you can actually use. Gerald had bet on community reputation. But community reputation doesn't override a signed and notarized shareholder agreement. And at a certain point, even loyal people stop making calls on your behalf when the person on the other end of the line keeps saying, "Please have him contact my attorney." About 10 days after the board vote, my doorbell rang on a Thursday afternoon. I looked through the peephole. Marcus. He was wearing jeans and a pullover I recognized from years ago, before the promotion-era wardrobe. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping well, which I believed. He was not performing anything. He just looked tired. I opened the door. I did not step aside. He said, "I'm not here to fight. I just need to ask you something." I waited. "Did you plan this from the beginning? Like when we got married? Was I just part of some plan to get the company?" I considered the question for a moment because it deserved an honest answer and not a quick one. "No," I said. "When we got married, I thought we were building something real. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet." He looked at the ground. "When did you know?" "Probably around the time your father handed me a $17 million problem and called it a favor to family." He was quiet for a while. "I never knew how bad things got," he said. "He never told me." "I know." So the whole turnaround, the new contracts, the refinancing, the numbers he kept talking about at dinner, was my money, I said, and my structure and my attorney and 18 months of me approving decisions from a home office while you told me to stay out of business conversations because I'd get lost. He didn't have a response to that. He just stood there with it. After a moment, he said the divorce papers had arrived and his attorney said the settlement was fair. I said I knew. Renata had prepared them to be exactly that. He nodded. He turned to go. Then he stopped and looked back. "Claudette's good," he said. "The people at the firm who are still there, they say it feels different, more professional, less like what it was." I said I was glad. He walked to his car. I closed the door. 3 weeks after the dinner at Arden's, Claudette Osei held her first all-staff meeting at Harwell Group. I wasn't there. I watched through a video feed Renata's contact had arranged, a passive link that let me observe without being visible. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and watched on my laptop. Claudette walked in wearing a dark blazer and reading glasses she didn't bother taking off. She stood at the front of the room and waited for the noise to settle, which it did quickly, because there's something about her presence that makes people pay attention without requiring them to. She said, "My name is Claudette Osei. I'm the new CEO of Harwell Group. I understand there's been some uncertainty about what that means. I'm going by end Marcus, I told 3 months